So please welcome to the stage John Brooks, Deputy Administrator and Chief Policy and Regulatory Officer at CMS. John, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Got a room full of people here who want to know what your next decision is going to be.
That's good. How are you holding up? I mean, this is a marathon for you.
No, I'm doing great. I mean, that's
right,
kind of like midway through. Like it's 10:45. I think we're going to 5 o'clock or something like that. So, but look, I'm obsessed with, as I said earlier, excellence, and we have a cluttered healthcare picture. A lot of pressures on it. You have new tech coming in, AI. We have all. You and I were talking just, I think, yesterday or the day before about all the news around China right now and biomedical surges in what China is able to do to sort of challenge our system. And it's all wrapped up in coverage and cost and big system. And the biggest player in the space, well, I mean, I shouldn't say this, but I mean, a big player is government, is you. And then, of course, you have the private sector, you have this. I just love to kind of get your map as to what you are now trying to fix or move forward in your role right now, what your big priority list is, because someone like you comes into these, from the kind of background you have, because you want to change this and get us out of inertia. You're making a bold bet to some degree by being in this position and changing it. So what levers are you trying to shift around?
Yeah, I mean, I think it may be helpful to level set a little bit in terms of the U.S. and China on pharmaceuticals generally. So I think the U.S. historically, especially over the last 30 and 40 years, has become the preeminent, investor, but also financer of innovation for global pharmaceuticals. And that's all. And we've also been drawing more and more of the manufacturing as well as the clinical research and investment to the United States. So that's been the trend over the last 30 to 40 years. That's been driven largely by obviously decisions in the United States that have been favorable to investment, but also by a pronounced underinvestment in terms of other developed countries. So for instance, Europe over the last 30 to 40 years, country by country, has basically gone through and found ways to underinvest in properly valuing pharmaceutical products. And so that's basically created this void, and then that's led to a very positive result for the United States, which is that the U.S. Kind of pharmaceutical development ecosystem is kind of one of the crown jewels of our country. We attract the top talent, we attract the investment, and then our patients get the benefit of these new therapies, and then patients the world over get the benefit of these new therapies. We saw that with Operation Warp Speed as well as numerous other therapies over the last 10 to 15 years. What we've seen in the last 5 to 10 is that we've seen two things that I think have created some challenges that the U.S. needs to think about. So the first is China has made a very conscious decision to invest in what are called key starting materials. So the materials before you even get to API that go into making up products. And so this isn't a particularly large
precursors, or
these are precursors basically to. And so basically you've got KSMs, then you've got API, and then you've got kind of fill and finish where you're actually making them the products. And so there's several different stages. And KSM production is kind of has some environmental messiness to it, and it's also not a very large market. It's really only about a $15 billion market, which isn't that large if you think about the kind of global investment in prescription drugs. But what we've seen over the last 15 to 20 years is around 70 to 80% of the KSM production, so the initial starting materials that go into our drugs, is now coming out of China, which isn't necessarily a problem on its own with global supply chains, but does create potentially a security
risk. Don't mean to interrupt
risk.
you, but can you tell me where that production was before it went to China?
So it was diffuse. So if you think about, like most global supply chains, there's basically each different material that goes into a product. Right. Every company at every point in the supply chain is trying to optimize for the cheapest price for that ingredient as they work through the process. So it was much more diffuse, and it's gotten increasingly concentrated in China over the last 10 to 15 years.
So some of it was in the US, or some of it was in India, or some of it was in wherever.
Primarily migrating more from India or other countries with kind of lower production costs.
So did China strategically target that?
So yes, this was a deliberate decision and a series of deliberate investments, which makes a lot of sense as you're kind of moving up the value chain and increasing your manufacturing capacity as a country.
So I guess the natural question is to get that back. One of the things I hear from industry is saying, hey, if we're going to onshore those API, and the precursors and all this stuff back to either U.S. shores or allies or something in this hemisphere. What I hear is missing is the sort of element that China was able to do, which is set up a price structure or a cost structure or a floor, and to create a market signal that works for these companies. Are we doing that? Because I think it's the missing piece as I participate in these onshoring discussions. Does the U.S. government have the ability to create that price signal that gets onshoring really moving back this way?
Yeah, so I'd say a few things. So if you think about our brand pharmaceuticals and kind of the tariff agreements and the most favored nation agreements that the administration has agreed to with the 17 largest manufacturers over the last year and a half. So that those manufacturers represent around 84% of the volume of brand pharmaceuticals in the United States. So there we've gotten concrete commitments from these companies to onshore and to bring manufacturing back to the US. But that tends to be more at the API or fill and finish level. So on the KSM level, because our system right now is optimized towards the lowest price, it doesn't build a lot of resiliency into the system. And so that leaves that kind of outstanding supply chain vulnerability. One thing that we've talked about significantly is within the administration is ways to make strategic investments to lower the cost of nearshoring or onshoring directly into the US, the KSM manufacturing. And so trying to find the right market incentives, recognizing that on our payment levers, if you look across pharmacy channel, if you look across our generic drugs, which are over 90% of our prescriptions, that's optimized in price. Rather than blowing up that entire system, what we probably need to do is make some strategic investments to make the production cheaper on a nearshoring basis, so that those companies can compete on and be competitive in the existing U.S. marketplace, rather than trying to reinvent the entire reimbursement mechanism across the U.S.
John, this room, and you're going to have hundreds of people cycle through here today, maybe the only population that if I were to say, I'm going to create a mega summit called payments, they would show up. Like payments, everybody else in America's eyes would glaze over and they go, what? But there's a crowd there obsessed with payments, and it creates in reimbursements and payments, and I kind of want to have a Schoolhouse Rock video, someday that's not how a bill became a law, but how a drug got a price. And in this space, it would be really interesting, I think, to hear from your perspective what levers on payments in the world that you're in, because it creates a footprint, right? I mean, what you do is you create a footprint of priority, of drugs, of accessibility, and almost everything you do is controversial, right? Do people buy you drinks at bars?
They're not allowed to under ethics rules, so please.
So I don't know. I guess the question is, what do you hope to see change, and what should we know as an interested population in that kind of payments footprint and the future of it?
Well, I think, I talked about one piece of the China puzzle, and I didn't talk about the other piece, which is we're also seeing a movement of clinical trials to China.
Yeah.
Yes, phase 1 clinical trials, we've seen just significant increases there, and that again represents strategic investments and probably a wise strategic investment by the Chinese government. So I think that one of the interesting things in the data that I've seen anyway is that we haven't really seen a drop off in phase 1 clinical investment in the United States. What we've seen is just an increase in China while holding steady the level of investment in the United States. But it is a challenge to us as we think about the FDA and our kind of overall ecosystem for approval, is that we've been able to basically rely on the fact that we're the preeminent hub of innovation for the last 10 to 15 years without really thinking about it. But now with this development, we really do need to thoughtfully evaluate our FDA processes, and the FDA team, led by our new acting commissioner, Kyle, who's great. They're going through a process now of looking at our FDA process and looking for ways to lower costs for patients. So that's one piece that I wanted to highlight as I tried to address the first question related to China, is that the clinical trial piece is changing too. On the reimbursement front,
the clinical trial and they fit together then with what you're doing, right? So you've got to have these things aligned. Exactly.
And if you think about it, we're talking about two very different parts of the supply chain. So we're on the one hand, we're talking about the lowest, least fancy and exciting part of the supply chain, which is, KSM production. So that piece is not that exciting. But then on the other, we're talking about where is the cutting edge investment in new clinical trials going, right? And so what we're seeing is kind of challenges on both fronts for different reasons, and we need to work and are working to address kind of both pieces. But particularly in the clinical trials, the FDA is working through different processes, whether it's looking at our processes for initial approvals, whether it's how applications are reviewed, whether it's what sort of data will be reviewed, whether it's ensuring that there's better flow of data and interoperability of the data, so that the data is shared more quickly. All of those pieces need to be improved in order for us to remain competitive in terms of attracting investment in new therapies.
So we know about the change in leadership at the FDA, and I guess the question I have, and I want to ask you a question you can't answer, but I want to ask you a question of, do we run risks of pushing too hard to get faster and faster FDA behavior? Do you put the public at risk? In other words, if I talk to FDA people who say, hey, we care about public safety and innovation, I remember talking to Scott Gottlieb, who was there years ago in the first Trump administration, about this social contract where you had to get things right, and it's just there's a process. Some of this takes time. I mean, I guess how much of that curve is bendable in a safe way, and do you worry that sometimes the political pressure to move faster and do some of this could harm the country?
Yeah, I think all of these things are. It's important to kind of segment the different pieces of the approval process. So. If we're talking about something like the actual safety review of the evidence, or the length of time of the clinical trial and the gathering of the evidence, I mean that type of thing, we need to make sure for a whole host of reasons that process remains and has its integrity in place. So the American people fundamentally need to have confidence in the FDA, and that when the FDA says a drug is safe and effective, that it is. And so absolutely, I don't think anyone's talking about relaxing standards there. Well, what we are talking about is where we've got these unnecessary hurdles in the process, where we've got months of delays related to getting an IRB approval to do the initial study, where we've got data delays and data lags, where the clinical data is just taking a while to migrate so that it can be evaluated. Where we've got kind of unnecessary paperwork in the process. Those are the type of things where we really want to focus on modernizing. Also, if you think about the priority review voucher, are we making the right decisions in terms of the order of which products are reviewed and prioritizing products that will be of most benefit to the American people? So I think all of those are the pieces where I think we have more flexibility while maintaining the safeguards that are essential to make sure to have confidence in a process, and also to have a process in which you should have confidence.
From your purview, what can AI do as it's coming on, the tsunami of AI? I'm increasingly I don't like talking about AI because it's such a blob, but I mean, I'm interested in, from your perspective, what do you think it can do to enhance drug development, drug costs, process costs? Do you see immediate efficacy of AI coming into the world in which you're in?
I think so. I think there's always kind of two risks with AI. The one is the kind of overpromising this is going to solve everything overnight, and then the other is kind of the doomsaying or the underplay of the value. And so I'd say there are a lot of different pieces, whether it's if you think about recruiting for clinical trials, if you think about trying to identify drug targets, if you think about trying to figure out how to target the molecule, where the ability to process large amounts of data more quickly and it could really speed up the process and help make the process more efficient. But that's not going to solve overnight, the inherent challenges of evaluating, messy clinical data, the judgment that's required to evaluate data, and the difficult conversations that need to go on there. So I think AI can improve an awful lot of the operational burdens there, help us get a little bit smarter in terms of the targets we go after. But I don't want to overpromise and say, we're suddenly going to get we're going to get to the sunny up that lands overnight. It's going to take a while. Every piece of the drug development process is complicated. And so there's a lot of operational efficiencies and a lot of additional data capability in terms of analysis that AI brings us, but it doesn't bring us everything.
In the regulatory and policy shop that you run, are you allowed to use any of these platforms like ChatGPT or Claude or, what's the Google one?
Gemini?
Gemini. Excuse me. Sorry, Google people, they're out there. So,
yeah, no, we use all three of those.
You're allowed to use them.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm going to tell you folks something that I find staggeringly ridiculous is that the people that are the president's tech advisors can't use these platforms. So the people that are making the decisions, and I don't know if you know that. I mean,
I wasn't aware.
It's a big deal. So that the people that are actually sort of guiding, advising, encouraging the adoption of the president's AI agenda are themselves unable to use that in a way that connected I don't know how far in the White House, but I'm absolutely certain on the tech side. So I'm thrilled to hear you can actually use the tools. You should call Michael Kratsios and tell him what it's like. Because, so it's a very interesting anomaly, and I don't know why it is, but somebody who's enterprising out there ought to go dig that up. As you kind of look broadly at the kind of AI picture, we have our friends at Lilly here and others, I'm interested in whether or not you're seeing, despite what you've negotiated as a government with some of the big industries, are you seeing the cost curve get bent in any other positive arenas?
So I think it's early. So obviously with the prescription drug deals, we'll see some cost savings immediately. But a lot of the MFN process has really been aimed at trying to address the disparity and underinvestment that we're seeing in terms of other developed countries not paying their fair share. So, for instance, one of the concepts that's embedded in the most favored nation drug agreements that we negotiated is a concept called prospective MFN, which is basically you can, as a new drug gets approved by the FDA, as that product is brought to market internationally and other developed markets, U.S. patients should get the benefit of any discounts that are offered there compared to the price in the U.S. market. And so there, in addition to the trade actions we're pursuing with USTR and Commerce, we signed a deal with the United Kingdom within the last several months that was finalized. We're seeing a move and an encouragement where both manufacturers on the private side as well as the government using our trade tools are trying to create an ecosystem where we have a broader platform for investment in new therapies so that the U.S. taxpayer, which is currently financing 65, or U.S. patients are currently financing 65 to 75% of innovation with 4% of the world's population, that dynamic needs to shift a little bit. And so that's one of the pieces that we're looking at is aligning those incentives, and we're actively pursuing trade agreements with other countries.
So, John, for folks that don't follow all that, I mean, it's kind of an equilibrium model, right? So, on one hand, you either need the costs of the pharmaceuticals to rise in those foreign governments to satisfy you, or you need to decrease the cost to that level of the MFN. That's the way it is. A lot of these companies are screaming about that because they say, wow, we're going to get our science R&D budget is going to get whacked in that process. How do you not lose America's leadership and equities in the science R&D space, which you said, I mean, rightly, we may be, American taxpayers may be, but that's a source of our power, right? Power in the world. And how do you not sacrifice that in the effort to bring costs down? I hate to say it, but shouldn't the pressure be get the costs up and keep the science and R&D dollars where they are?
Well, I think it's a balance of both. So, I mean, we have three goals for the MFN process. The first is to protect innovation. Second is to lower costs for patients. And then the third is this equalization. So we very thoughtfully, working with folks like Lilly as well as the other 16 manufacturers, designed a construct that does both, which preserves the payment for a lot of existing products in commercial and Medicare, while asking for discounts in Medicaid, which serves our most vulnerable beneficiaries, and says for new therapies where you're controlling your launch prices internationally, that's where we expect to see you hold out for higher prices and actually realign the incentives. So, I mean, if you think about the U.S., we're at $38 trillion and counting national debt. We've been financing 65 to 75% of the innovation for the last 15 to 20 years. At a certain point, I mean, and we're seeing this, if you think about just the access challenges to GLP-1s that Derek and you were describing earlier, employers are hitting a breaking point in a lot of cases in terms of their health plan costs. They can't indefinitely sustain healthcare costs that are growing at 2 to 3% faster than the rest of the economy indefinitely. I mean, and that's money that's coming out of the wages of every American too. A lot of times when you look at American wages and you say, oh, they're not rising as fast as we would expect in line with GDP growth, a lot of what's happening is what's being substituted in is additional healthcare spending in terms of that benefit. So there needs to be a balance. We absolutely want to maintain our leadership position as the largest funder of innovation and development, but we also need to recognize that we can't just continue a system that's hitting some major pain points and breaking points in terms of affordability and the tolerance of the American people to continue financing.
Before you leave, John, what's the single most important, cool thing you want to accomplish before we have this conference next year?
I think the most important thing is really before next year. Okay. Well, we want to continue finalizing agreements.
I know, but not continuing. That's boring. Cool thing.
New cool thing. I think we need to make more progress on curative therapies. So if you think about curative therapies, a lot of our healthcare system is designed to finance chronic or acute conditions. So oncology or diabetes medication or something like that. But what we don't have is a good payment platform for cell and gene therapies. And right now, there's a disincentive in Medicaid programs which are financed in state budgets on an annual basis and in the commercial space to cover some of those therapies. So I think, particularly in the Medicaid side, that we have an opportunity to work with companies to try and identify some ways to help finance some of the curative therapies, particularly in pediatric populations, that could be really beneficial to states in terms of lowering costs for states, as well as improving and providing access to patients for these incredible curative therapies. Just one quick note. So we had a sickle cell model in our cell and gene therapy model. Right. That we rolled out earlier this year. And there, the U.S. government basically stood in for the states and worked with the companies in that space to negotiate a pricing offer and negotiate outcomes and payments linked to those outcomes. And we saw participation from 33 states, and 84% of patients with sickle cell now have access through their Medicaid programs to that product, through that market. So I think that model is very exciting. That's something I'd like to see more of.
I bet you dream about this deal making. I mean, you're a deal maker in your dreams. I mean, I'm sure that's the case. But I really want to thank John Brooks. Is a fantastic guy to deal with. He's been very engaged with us in these healthcare discussions and very candid in lots of forms. I just want to say thank you so much. John Brooks, Deputy Administration and Chief Policy and Regulatory Officer at CMS. Thanks so much for spending time with us, John.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you.